Hello, I'm Sam from Sound on Sound magazine. I'm in Anaheim, California, very near the location of the NAMM show, in a secret room deep within the bowels of the Marriott Hotel. And I'm very pleased to be joined by Bob from Groove Synthesis. Hello, Bob. How are you doing?
All right, and yourself? This is great. We've got Sound on Sound up here with us.
Well, I'm really pleased to be here. And really excited to be standing behind this fearsome-looking blue instrument, which is once strangely familiar and yet also new. Tell us a little bit about the third wave.
Right, so this is the third wave, and it is called the third wave because it's our take on what would have happened if PPG would have stayed in business. It's an update. It does the PPG, but it does much more, and it is our homage to the brilliance of Mr. Palm and his original designs, and yet, like I said, it takes it much up to date and into the future, including some machine learning that we've got in it to do your own wavetable making.
Wow. Because, of course, the PPG wave is the definitive wavetable synthesizer. For anyone who's watching and doesn't know what that means, just explain a little bit about what wavetable synthesis is.
Sure. So wavetable synthesis, unlike subtractive synthesis, which we're all used to, analog synthesis as people call it, there you're starting with a waveform that has a large number of harmonics and you're running it through a filter to make a sound. So you take things out and they call it subtractive synthesis. Wavetable synthesis, on the other hand, you're taking a sound and you are dividing it up into, in this case, 64 single cycle wavetables. So you've got 64 waveforms in a wavetable, and you walk through them. So that's how you get your motion in your sound. And you can think of it also as a very brute force way of doing data compression. You're going to take and we'll show you that later, you're going to take a file that might be multiple seconds in length, and you're going to whittle it down to these 64 single cycles, and then you're going to walk through those to get all of that range that you got in the original recording via this wavetable.
So the original PPG wave was a kind of hybrid analog digital synth in some ways.
Yes. So the PPG, which we've got over here, it took those 64 time slices that I was talking about. He usually did those by hand, and then it went, so those were digital. It went out the door to an analog filter and VCA with normal envelopes like you would expect with a normal analog synthesizer. So it had this very unique upfront oscillator and then a very familiar back end, if you will.
And you've recreated that architecture on the third wave?
Right. We've got 3 oscillators, which is why we're calling it third instead of the 2.2 or 2.3, which was what came before. So we've got 3 oscillators here, and then we go out into analog low-pass filter, just like the PPG, and all the way out the door. We've also got a couple of effects. We've got all kinds of things that I should go over here. But let's start with the oscillators. So the oscillators, you've got, as I said, 3, and they run in 3 different modes. You can do all the original PPG 8-bit wavetable with it, and all the processing that went downstream from that that Mr. Palm did, including some very interesting things like not having interpolation and having an upper wavetable and various other things that I'll go into more detail on. But then you can also go in and have these be a modern day wavetable where you're, where you are running at 96 kilohertz. So if we were to take in a piece of audio and make a wavetable out of it, you're running at 96 kilohertz. It's completely anti-aliased, and you can go up as high as you want or as low as you want and replace those and make it your own machine as well, because you are making the wavetables in addition to what we would supply you with. So you can have your own set in there and be the only guy in town that has that. Then last but not least, the third mode is analog modeling. We've got a spline interpolated model in there that is also completely anti-aliased, and you'll hear that here in a minute. So this covers a large amount of ground as far as what your sound making capabilities are before you even get going downstream from there. It's got a 6-stage linear wave envelope. And that doesn't have to just go to the wavetables, but what this does is it allows you to walk through those wavetables to different positions and different times as you go, and that is entirely separate from the normal ADSR envelopes that you're probably familiar with. We've got 4 of those as well. The normal filter and amp, and then we've also got 2 auxiliaries that you can also apply to the wavetables or whatever you want to apply it to. In addition to that, 4 LFOs. We've got 16 mod slots that, oh gosh, you can tie yourself in a knot with as far as all the modulation capabilities. Again, you've got the analog normal 4th order low pass filter, and we've also got a state variable filter, very similar to like an Oberheim SEM type of filter. We've also got a sequencer on board, which is, shouldn't be a big deal, but in this case it kind of is, because it's 4-part multi-timbral and it's pattern based and it's song based. So you would use this more like you would a drum machine. You can use quantization, you can turn it off and on at will, it will remember what you did, et cetera, et cetera. We've got, of course, an arpeggiator, and then we've got, as I mentioned, the 2 effects per part. So you've got 4-part multi-timbral. You can do a stack, because we've got 24 voices. You can do a stack with 4 different patches if you want, and still have a 6-voice synthesizer when you're all done. You can keep it all separate, however you want to do it.
Wow. So I guess one of the things about the PPG Wave, or any of these older early digital syntheses, their sound almost comes as much from the limitations of the technology of the time as it does from the intended design. And have you recreated those kind of quirks?
Yes, yeah. So Mr. Palm, man, he was brilliant in figuring out how to get this thing to even work with the technology he had at the time. And he just didn't have the horsepower to do what you would learn today in a DSP school, for instance. So we have recreated the way that he put those 8-bit wavetables in. A lot of people say, hey, I've got an 8-bit PPG wavetable, but there's a lot more to it than that went on downstream to make it sound like it does. And there's aliasing, which probably everybody's familiar, they've heard that. There's also imaging going on that gives it that really odd growl at the low end, where you actually get frequency wraparound that makes it sound that unique way. That's all in here. He didn't use interpolation. He used an upper wavetable, so if you went out of bounds on a given wavetable that you were on because you're modulating, he would drop into another. We've got that covered. He ran at a very high sample rate. That's all in here. And he ran at a very high sample rate, again, because he had a very old, I think it was a 386 processor, and he just divided the clock between the 8 voices. So whatever that worked out to, there you go. And it works, and it sounds great, and it sounds very unique, and this will do that sound. But again, this will go well beyond that.
Wow. Well, I've heard you playing the same patch now on the wave and the third wave. The similarity really is quite spooky. Maybe you could give us a quick example of that.
Right. The question we get asked all the time, and that you just asked yourself, Sam, is how close does it sound to the PPG? And we think we've got that covered. I'm going to just play you an example here of a factory patch. This is factory patch 31 from the PPG. And Mattia, who's going to take it over in a little bit, he's going to actually do a full-fledged video later where we actually compare a bunch of the patches. But for this, so this is factory patch 31. And then if I play a chord, you can hear we're pretty close, if not, as I say, dead on. But then the other things that I was going to show real quick before we pass it over to Tia. So if I go to a patch, this is another PPG factory patch, 17. So as I said, you've got 3 different modes with these oscillators. So here, if I turn this way up, you're going to hear that fabulous aliasing that everybody's used to. And you can hear it kind of at you. That is, of course, the PPG 8-bit wavetables. Now, if I go up into our user wavetables, which are the ones that are sampled at 96K and also have everything anti-aliased, then we're going to play you a note up there, and you'll see now you got a pure tone up there. And this is exactly the same patch. You can get, again, a lot of mileage. We didn't change anything other than the wavetable we're playing back. Last but not least, if you go over to something that is analog, so this has nothing to do with wavetable now. This is just strictly a sawtooth. So this is doing an analog patch. So you've got yourself covered with 3 types of modes right off the bat. The last thing we want to show you real quick is the make waves functionality. So what we're going to do is you can do this one of 2 ways. You can actually plug a jack into the back of the third wave and record audio directly into it, or you can take a 96 kilohertz wave file that we've got here and drop that into the third wave, which is what we're going to do in this case. So I'm just going to play you real quick. This is me saying groove synthesis, very low.
Groove synthesis.
There you go. We're going to drop that wave file into the third wave. We've got the third wave hooked up via USB to the computer, and you can see now there's groove synthesis in there. And I'm going to put the laptop down and come over to the synthesizer. So in the global menu, you've got read wavemaker wave file. We're going to bring that in. It says groove. I hit OK. And there we are in the make waves area. I'm going to hit make wavetable. And what it's showing you is detecting pitch. Now it's using a machine learning loss function to chop up that groove synthesis thing that I said into those 64 single cycle waves in order to make a wavetable out of this for you. Now this would normally take you, I don't know, when I do it by hand, this is like an hour-long process of trying to figure out where exactly do I want to cut it and how do I splice it back together and all that sort of thing. But this, it just finished. So there we are. We are on a init patch here, and I'm going to take what was in that init patch right now. So that's just a normal wave file right now. And we're going to change the wavetable to use the one that we just put in there. And if you cannot see this on screen, it says wavemaker table. So now if I play that, there it is. So we've got that wavetable in there, and that will allow you, in this case it's me saying something, so it's not even necessarily a normal wavetable that you would want to make, but that functionality is available to you, and that functionality is what we're going to have shipping so that you can actually put your own things in here.
I guess I'm also just interested in the background of your company, because I've not come across the name Groove Synthesis before. Where are you coming from with this?
Right. So I've done 10 years at Sequential doing their DSP. There was a point where I was working for Dave and the crew full time, and I'm not going to say Dave too much because of what just happened. I'm very sad about that. But anyway, I still do their DSP, and that is part of the learning process. Dave has taught me a lot over the years. But before that, I also have the background of coming from DigiDesign and Avid. I did their 11 modeling, guitar amp modeling and what have you with Chris Townsend. And then also their Elastic Audio pitch and time. Grace Note as well. That's where Andrew, who's out on the floor, he and I both worked at Grace Note and developed their audio fingerprint. And then we've got our hardware person, also Kevin, working with us from Grace Note. And then we've got a couple of other folks from Sequential that are, much experience with them helping out with the marketing, what you see here. And we finally got a gentleman working with us, Ross, on the metal design and everything else that you see here. Ross and I set out to get this as close as we could to what we think would have happened, again, if PPG would have stayed in business. So it's definitely not meant to look like that 2.3 that we have here, and yet it's meant to look like it came from the same family. And I think Ross did a great job with that as well.
He certainly did. So do you have any idea when this is going to be available?
So it's going to be available August 15th, possibly sooner, but definitely August 15th is what we're telling everybody right now. And it's going to have a list price of $37.95. So $37.95, you're going to get a 24-voice synthesizer with analog filters, blah, 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 blah. And it's I don't know, it's a lot of synth for the money.
It's not one synth, but three synths by the sound of it.
Well, actually 4. If you've got it stacked as a 4-part multi-timbral, yeah, you're going to get 4 6-voice synthesizers out of it. And actually, Mattia will show you a couple patches that actually show that off.
Wow, well, thanks, Bob. I can't wait to hear it. So without further ado, let's hear Mattia. Thank you.
So my name is Mattia Simovic. I'm from the band Inhalt, and I run a recording studio here in Los Angeles called Infinite Power Studios, which is where a lot of the sound design and the beta testing and critical listening has been going on the third wave. It's already been used on a couple of records that are being made here, and so we have some real use case scenarios that have informed not just the sound design side, but also the development of the synth. And as Bob mentioned, as much as we can cover classic PPG wave ground, this is a new synthesizer with several different synthesis methods, and it leads to just really interesting and very musical sounds that both reference the past but are also quite modern. So we have these very, very smooth sounds, and because we have multiple parts to work with, we can create very wide stereo effects by putting one patch hard left, putting another patch hard right, and then a third patch down the middle, which is what happened here. The other side of this synthesizer is, again, because we have 4 parts to work with, and a sequencer that can address those 4 parts, there's quite a lot that we can do in terms of just sequencing a multi-timbral performance like this patch. And similarly, I will go to another sequencer patch, a familiar sound. Now, the very cool thing that I want to point out about this patch, when we're in the multi-part section, we have discrete control over the volumes, the pans, and the tuning offsets for each part. And that can become a performative thing because we can bring parts in and out in real time. And as you can hear, that there's a lot of effect going on, but not all patches in the multi-part use that effect. So if we need something very specific, like a time delay for a sequence, we can make that happen, but we can keep the other parts clean or add different effects for the other parts as we need them. And then I'll show a little bit more about the sequencer here. So we have that sound, dual part. You know what? Sorry, I gotta cut that. I went to the wrong patch. That'll work. So the sequencer is very, very straightforward to work. It's a live input sequencer, but it quantizes. And what's great about it is that we can set whatever measures we want, and we can also set the parameters to record, which means we can record in any of the knob movement, and the sequencer will put it down and play it back. So here I'm just going to clear the previous sequence, hit record, and I'm going to punch in a sequence live with quantization on 16ths. And so there I recorded the Wavesurfer knob. And what the Wavesurfer knob does is it actually allows us to scan through the wavetable offsets of all three wavetable oscillators at the same time, which is really, really handy for creating just very complicated timbral offsets on the fly as a performative control. And that can be recorded much like any other parameter. The other thing that this patch sort of showed off was the fact that we have multiple envelope types. So we have within the miscellaneous menu the choice to choose what kind of envelope curve you want. The PPG Wave had very bizarre, almost linear envelope shapes with perpetually long release times. And that's modeled perfectly here. So if you're looking to kind of get that waveform and that level of dynamics like the original had, you can do it. But at the same time, because this does so much more than the PPG Wave did, we also have a very modern envelope within this, as you would expect on any modern polyphonic analog synthesizer. And you can choose that, and that is programmed per patch. So it's not like a global control or anything like that. It's actually baked into the sound. So as you switch through the programs, it will be reflected there. I'll show a couple more sounds. This is a two-part sound. Has a very musical top end. Here's a patch that does quite a bit of wave scanning. So again, because we have these virtual analog waveforms present, we're also able to make all of the sounds that you would associate with a polyphonic analog synth like pads. this patch uses the aftertouch and velocity, and this is, since it's a guitar keybed, it's a very, very, very playable keybed, very playable action. It's just a playing, you can do kind of playing that anybody expects from playing on like a Prophet 5 Rev 4. And then so that's a quick bass patch, and that one actually uses the state variable filter. So I know there were a lot of questions online about what that filter sounds like, and it sounds fantastic. And then, of course, plenty of classic PPG-inspired sounds.